The main character, protagonist, strike leader, and hero throughout the 1992 Disney's film Newsies is undoubtedly Jack Kelly, also known as the Cowboy. He is known by the other Manhattan Newsies as the best in their district and venerated for his escape from the Refuge, a juvenile rehabilitation center where arrested minors were detained, on the back of Teddy Roosevelt's carriage. Although this character carries the entire plot of the film, he is replicated after no real Jack Kelly involved in the 1899 strike. The closest figure he resembles is Kid Blink. This comparison can be drawn due to Kid Blink's revealed identity after an arrest and his traitorous actions against the strikers. That's right, I don't mean to spoil a conflict in the film, but Jack is persuaded by Pulitzer to set an example for the other Newsies to stop the strike. In return, Jack would avoid going to the Refuge, be awarded with cash, and his friends and their families would not be harmed. While we don't know if Kid Blink took a deal similar to this for similar reasons, in Kids on Strike by Susan Campbell Bartoletti, she discusses how rumors spread to the Newsies that two of their leaders, David Simmons and Kid Blink, had become scabs. These speculations mainly came from parades that were organized but frequently postponed, and they were eventually discovered to be true. Both David Simmons and Kid Blink were spotted dressed nicely and selling papers. Kid Blink was chased through the streets by angry Newsies wanting to soak him, but he was spotted by the officers on the street, and those officers believed that he was leading a gang of boys, so the officers arrested him. After his arrest, it was revealed that Kid Blink was really Louis Balat. In Disney's film, while Jack is arrested, it is revealed that his real name is Francis Sullivan. It is then, once he is arrested, that Pulitzer offers Jack, or Francis, a deal. Obviously, these narratives are different, but the similarities in becoming a traitor and living under a pseudonym that is debunked by the law can allow us to see Jack Kelly as an attempt to replicate Kid Blink. However, what is particularly shocking about Jack being a loose interpretation of Kid Blink is that Kid Blink himself is featured in the Disney film. As you can see in this photo, this particular Newsie wears an eye patch on one eye, and his casting lists assigned Kid Blink as his character name. So, why not make Kid Blink the leading character? Is Disney recognizing that there were various leaders in the strike as a whole, so they wanted to avoid Kid Blink having the full spotlight? If that's the case, why give Jack Kelly characteristics of Blink's history? And why does Jack act as the main leader in the film? The way in which Disney portrays these two characters, Kid Blink and Jack Kelly, is ambiguous when lined up against history. We can even look at this depiction of Kid Blink and conclude that yes, he wears an eye patch over one eye. But I know this picture isn't the best, but does this boy look small? He's pretty much level with Jack. He's not a small kid. He's not the Kid Blink. He's just Blink. Therefore, while the inclusion of Kid Blink's character is an attempt to nod at a historical truth, it's really just more of a hopeful shrug. On the other hand, the Newsies we know less about make a less confusing appearance throughout the film, such as Racetrack Higgins, as pictured here. If you recall, Racetrack Higgins is reported as being presenting at the Irving Hall meeting on July 24th. In Disney's film, he also appears in many scenes, offering his ideas regarding how the strike should be carried out. Additionally, Spot Conlon is probably the most historically accurate Newsie depicted in the 1992 film, based on my research. David Nassau points out in the article Dirty-Faced David and the Twin Goliaths that a reporter from The Sun conducted and published in full his meeting with a Newsie known as Spot Conlon. Spot Conlon was the district master workboy of the Brooklyn Union. While this title is not explicitly stated in the 92 film, Conlon is the newsie of power and control in Brooklyn, and feared by many. Nassau goes on in his article pointing out that Conlon was dressed in pink suspenders. As you can see in this photo, Conlon is dressed in suspenders that one might consider red, or possibly a dark shade of pink. But these are big successes on Disney's part that we shouldn't take lightly. Not only to capture the powerful spirit of a leader in Brooklyn who is feared, but they artistically recapture his image as we know it from the newspaper articles in 1899. The most major distinguishable difference between Spot Conlon, the character, and Spot Conlon, the person, is the association with the strike. In the film, Conlon agrees to help out the Manhattan newsboys if they don't back down at the first sign of trouble. So he kind of holds off and is like, oh, I'll help you if you can do it, like if y'all really can. However, the Sun article that Nassau references reports Conlon as stating that he has the scabs in Brooklyn taken care of, and that he will join the thousands, or join them, meaning the Newsies in Manhattan, with thousands from Brooklyn to, quote, help yous win your noble scrap for freedom and fair play, end quote. Therefore, we can see how the willingness to aid the cause is changed for the film production. The next character I'd like to introduce you to is Crutchy. Again, this character is based off a newsie we have less knowledge about, Crutchy Morris. As we know, he had trouble walking, and this helped him sell papers. If you recall from Lecture 1, I mentioned that seeking sympathy from potential customers was a marketing strategy used by the Newsies. Sometimes it was real, sometimes it wasn't, but sometimes, and in this case, it was very real. The character of Crutchy in his physical form is a representation of those Newsies who gained a real and honest sympathy of passersby. However, his crutch is in no way a fake need. It was very much necessary because of serious injuries that existed for some Newsies, such as Crutchy, in 1899. Bartoletti notes that, quote, for some Newsies the injuries were real. Newsboys often flipped cars, meaning they jumped aboard moving train or street cars for a free ride. Sometimes the newsboys fell from the cars and onto the track. They lost their arms and legs when the wheels ran over them. The Newsies didn't want wooden legs, though. They knew a crutch and an empty pant leg evoked far more sympathy and tips from customers, end quote. So yes, the crutch was necessary due to a very real injury, but when offered a wooden alternative, a newsie like Crutchy knew the silver lining that existed in their work as a result of their pain. But even so, Disney's Crutchy is aware of the sympathy tactic as like a false, fake thing that some newsies do just to get sympathy, whereas his is really real. And he asks Jack if he thinks that Crutchy's limp is fake, because he knows that there are so many other people out there just faking it. He doesn't want it to look like he's being dishonest. David Jacobs is pictured here, who throughout the film acts as the right-hand man to Jack. David gives Jack the wording and phrasing that helps persuade the Newsies to join the strike, and when Jack becomes a scab, David and the others are forced to call the shots on their own. Unlike others, David is a voice of reason who speaks out against the violence and is literally referred to by Spot Conlon and Jack later as a walking mouth. It is possible to infer that David Jacobs is an attempt to replicate the newsie who was elected to the strike committee as president, according to Nassau, named David Simmons. This is the same David Simmons that Bartoletti claims turned against the strike alongside Kid Blink. However, outside the leadership role and sharing their same first name, the two seem anything but similar. David Jacobs in the film is a new newsie on the block. He's hesitant about a boycott, but he eventually becomes driven to the strike throughout it all, even when Jack seemingly abandons the cause. David is also almost always shadowed by his little brother Les, who, as far as I can tell, simply represents the Newsies of a younger age that were also involved in the everyday labor in the strike. You can see him pictured here as well. Boots is significant to the cast lineup because he represents the diversity of newsboys that were actively working in the streets and actively striking on the streets along with everybody else. Nassau writes that 2 names reported in the papers, William Reese and John Folk, were described as, quote, Negroes by the Sun and were arrested for disturbing the peace, along with a series of other names associated with Newsies. Additionally, Bartoletti asserts that African American children worked in cities more often because they were rejected from laboring in textile mills or factories. John Dobbs was one of these African American child laborers who claims that he, quote, always had a job in the city as opposed to his hometown of Savannah, Georgia. Bartoletti includes his statement, quote, ever since I first worked as a delivery boy for the newspapers, I've had more jobs than I could do. If it wasn't the kind of work I liked, I did that until I could do better, end quote. We can obviously conclude that while some borders were placed on black child laborers, those who were willing to work had almost the same amount of limitless opportunities as others. Boots' character is representative of this history. Pictured here are Disney's portrayals of Joseph Pulitzer and his employee of higher pay and significance, Don Seitz. You'll remember Don as the writer of the memos that were sent to Pulitzer while he was absent due to health conditions. However, in the film, Seitz delivers his messages in person rather than overwritten messages. As for Pulitzer, it seems as if he needs no introduction. The depiction of Pulitzer is almost identical to the real Pulitzer. Disney even represented his sensitivity to sound in the scene where Jack confronts Pulitzer before the strike is settled, as represented in this image. As for the other newspaper giant who was targeted in the 1899 Newsboys strike, William Hearst is given face only in one scene. He is mainly mentioned throughout the film by name. The women featured in this film are not in any way Newsies, but they are supporters. On the left is Miss Meta Larkson, the theater owner and performer. She would let the boys come and hide in the theater from trouble out on the street. This is somewhat historically accurate in that Newsies who didn't have a home or place to sleep would attempt to find a place of peace and solace in theaters, according to Bartoletti, mainly to sleep. The other woman depicted is more accurately described as a girl, the sister of David and Les, named Sarah. In addition to being Jack's love interest, Sarah does work in her home, similar to the kind of safe works allowed for girls at the time. She is portrayed as helping with laundry and dinner preparations throughout the film in her home. But at the end, she does help the Newsies distribute their paper, their very own paper, printed in secret. So it is possible in this instance to think of her as a newsgirl. Lastly, Disney even went so far as to depict a reporter for another newspaper who acted on the side of the Newsies. Brian Denton reports the events of the strike for The Sun, and Disney's depiction is accurate insofar as he is a white male reporter, which was most common during the strike.